Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I hope you're not going to wait until December 24th to do your Christmas shopping. I finished mine last week. We have a tradition in our family. Each year we draw names from a cup on Thanksgiving night. That way we each only have to buy one gift instead of dozens. Saves some time and money. Instead of getting a bunch of cheap gifts from everybody, you get one really nice gift. If you can't decide, maybe you should check out T Public. Give them a look. If you buy something from Strange Things, it would be nice, but you really should get started on your Christmas shopping right away, so you don't wind up panic buying. And nobody wants a box of Tic Tacs as a gift. Yes, I've seen it done. We communicate with each other all the time. We use words, expressions, hand signs, all kinds of ways to get thoughts from our minds into the minds of others. Before writing became common, all people could use were words. Stories had to be passed on from person to person. Writing made it possible to leave behind ideas and stories. The recorder made passing on our ideas much faster. Video made it possible to not only pass on the words, but our facial expressions and hand gestures as well. Investigating ghosts has had some huge improvements over the years. Communicating with spirits has improved as well. From the earliest seances, where only the psychic could communicate with spirits, up until today, when the Ovilus allows ghosts to talk to anyone. There's also the ghost box, or spirit box, if you can stand that horrible noise. The mechanism runs white noise and it skips back and forth between stations. As it goes, you pick out words being spoken. I am not a fan. To me, the white noise is louder than the words, and kind of the old chalkboard and the fingernails trick. I like old school technology. Yes, I know old school and technology don't seem to go together, but at one time these things were modern. I like to use a pendulum. It's easy to use, it doesn't make any noise, and there's no batteries. You can buy your own pendulum for as low as a few bucks, all the way up to several $100s for pendulums containing meteorites, or they're made from silver and gold. It doesn't really matter what the pendulum is made of, they all work pretty much the same. Once you have a pendulum, you need to ask it. Yes, ask it what yes is going to look like. My first pendulum, which is wood, swings in a circle for yes. You ask what no is going to look like, and my pendulum would swing in a long, thin oval. The energy to make the pendulum move is coming from your body. The movement it makes is coming from someplace else. My new pendulum that I just got just had to be different. Yes, is back and forth, and no is a great big circle. Well, that's life. I now have to remember which is which when I'm using them. Here's a weird thing I discovered one day at a book fair. I held my pendulum over one of my non-fiction books. It began swinging in a great big circle. I moved my hand over to the fictional book I had written, and the pendulum just hung there, not moving at all. Weird and interesting at the same time. I showed this to my wife. We began experimenting with all kinds of things. Then I wrote some names on a piece of paper. We got some interesting responses, just asking good or bad while holding the pendulum over the name. You can also draw a circle on a piece of paper. Write yes at the top and bottom of the circle, and then write no to the right and left. You hold the pendulum as still as you can right over the center of the circle and ask a question. And see what kind of responses you get. My other old school device I like to use is a small handheld mirror, about 3 or 4 inches across. You hold the mirror out in front of you and you tip it to the side. You're looking at anything to your right or left. Do not hold it so you're looking over your own shoulder. If you see something, well, it's behind you. You know, like in a horror movie. The inclination will be to spin around and look. Hold it so you don't have to turn your body, just your head, to see if what's in the mirror is also right there beside you. I do carry a small digital recorder in my pocket, but I seldom use it. If you're doing an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, do not ask the spirits if they want you to leave until you're ready to go. If you get a yes answer, well, your session is done. If you're already leaving anyway, it won't mess up the investigation. Also, it's a good idea to be polite. You want the spirits to communicate with you, not upset them. Another form of ghost communication is called channeling. A person goes into a state of trance and a spirit uses them to send a message. This is a little too much like possession to me. I've read a few books by people who allowed an entity to enter their body so they could write. I'll pass on this one. The entity using these folks might be an angel, or it might be something else. Once it gets in, how do you make sure it leaves? The same goes for ghostwriting. The subject goes into a trance and writes out messages on paper. Sometimes you have to interpret what is there because it goes all over the page. It's one continuous line with words mixed in here and there. A lot of communication has to be interpreted by the person doing the communicating. This can lead to manipulation by the person doing the interpreting. Maybe I just have trust issues. Psychics and spiritualists have gained a bad reputation over the years. There are some that actually do communicate with the dead, but they don't charge by the hour. On a few occasions, people have communicated with spirits even when they weren't trying to. Folks have talked about stepping out of a hot shower to find writing on the mirror in the steam. On a few of the podcasts I listen to, the hosts have discovered EVPs mixed in with their voices on the show's recording. This following story comes from 1984. It involves a computer that might have been used by either ghosts or maybe time travelers. In 1984, home computers were few and far between. They were slow and very limited. Mostly they were just fancy typewriters. Once you created a file, you could store it on a floppy disk. Now, the disk was very limited as well. The Macintosh 128K was Apple's very first Macintosh computer. Priced at $2,500, it featured a 9-inch black and white screen, 2 serial ports, and a 3.5-inch floppy disk slot. The fire station I worked at wanted a computer. IBM headquarters was just down the road. A deal was made that was a bit odd, but we went along with it. IBM donated a bunch of money, as in several $1,000s, and then the money was used to buy a computer from them. We got a monitor, a computer tower, a printer, and a modem. Hooked the thing up, and then we waited as a couple of IBM guys got it up and running. Well, they got it up, sort of. It was giving us issues. We were supposed to type in an address of the fire, and the computer would give us a map location along with the first and secondary hydrants. It would also tell us any pertinent details about the location. That was the plan anyway. Days turned into weeks, which turned into months, with no computing going on. A couple of guys were visiting from another fire station. One of them was a computer guy. He asked to take a quick look. He poked at the keys for a few minutes, and then he whipped out a screwdriver. He took the cover off the tower and he said, "There's your problem." Underneath the fancy IBM cover, it said, Tandy. A Tandy was the brand name computer sold by Radio Shack. IBM had sold a Radio Shack computer to us. We wound up using the computer to play games, and that was about it. To this day, I still wonder, why did IBM sell us a Tandy? Well, back then, some schools began buying personal computers so the kids could learn how to use them and become computer savvy as they grew. Computer manufacturers gave them huge discounts as an investment in the future. Once the kids grew up and knew how to work the computers, they were more likely to buy one for themselves. 1984 schoolteacher Ken Webster was living in Dodleston, Cheshire, England, along with his girlfriend Debbie Oakes and their friend Nicola, as she was renting a small room from them. They were sharing an 18th century cottage. Ken was renovating the cottage when he had the time and money. He was also a musician. Folks have found over the years, when you start renovating an old house, sometimes the original owners would object. It wasn't long before the house was showing some ghostly activity. They would see 6-toed footprints on the walls. Painting over the prints was only a short-term solution. The footprints would return a few days later. Furniture would be moved in the middle of the night. They would go to bed and then discover a chair was in front of a door, or the couch might be pushed partway into a door opening. In the kitchen, cat food cans would be stacked in a pyramid. When asked, all three would deny doing any of these weird things. Over the weeks, the activity could no longer be ascribed to the living in the house. This only left the spirits. The activity was getting more common as the remodeling went along. Ken would set something down on the table and turn his back for a few seconds and find the item was gone. Furniture would be piled in the corner while everybody was out. Something was making a tapping sound inside the walls. This couldn't be explained by plumbing or squirrels. Writing was seen on the walls in chalk. Most of the sounds and writing was in the kitchen right next to an old brick pillar. If you're exposed to anything over a period of time, You can get used to it. Even having a paranormal house guest. I've talked to a lot of folks who lived for years knowing there were spirits sharing their homes. The school where Ken worked had received several personal computers. They had the Acorn BBC Micro Model B. The computer was launched December 1981 as part of the BBC's Computer Literacy Project. The project was created by the British Broadcasting Corporation to increase computer literacy and to encourage a wide range of people as possible would gain hand-on experience with the microcomputer. They had received more computers than they might need. Well, Ken started borrowing one to use at home. If you're going to teach kids how to use something, you should know how it works. These computers used a program called Edward. Edward. It also had a program to use for writing scripts and sketching. Those folks listening who grew up using modern computers will not understand how ancient this technology was. There was no spell check, no thesaurus, no color graphics. The screen usually had two colors, black and green. There were no cool pictures. In fact, there were no pictures whatsoever. Ken and Debbie went out to dinner. When they returned, the computer was still on. He checked the screen and he found a file saved on the floppy he didn't recognize. It was named KDN. A curiosity got to him, so he opened the file. It said, now I'm going to try reading this as it was written. There are lots of misspellings and really bad grammar. The text went, Ken, Deb, NIC. True are the nightmares of a person that fears. Safe are the bodies of the silent world. Turn, pretty flower, turn towards the sun, for you shall grow and sow. But the flower reaches too high and withers in the burning light. Get out your bricks. A pussycat went to London to seek fame and fortune. Faith must not be lost, for this shall be your Redeemer. The text was in bad shape. Lots of capital letters followed by lowercase mixed in. There were capitals in the middle of words, some of which were broken in the middle. It looked like what I get when one of my cats sits on the keyboard. The text went on with more misspelled words and horrible punctuation. Then again, if the spirit were from years ago, say hundreds of years, would the writer be familiar with how we write today? Old English was used until the 12th century. It is so different from modern English that it has to be approached as if it were a completely different language. You need to translate the words into our language. Middle English was used until the 15th century, and not so hard to read as Old English. During the 15th century, a huge amount of change affected English pronunciation, spelling, grammar, and vocabulary. Vowels were moved around, making it easier to pronounce the words. Whoever had been at the keyboard was using Old English spelling, and the pronunciation was just random. Punctuation was just random. The QWERTY layout was devised and created in the early 1870s by Christopher Latham Sholes, a newspaper editor and printer who lived in Kenosha, Wisconsin. In October 1867, Sholes filed a patent application for his early writing machine he developed with the assistance of his friends Carlos Glidden and Samuel Soule. Scholes struggled for the next 5 years to perfect his invention, making many trial and error rearrangements of the original machine's alphabetical key arrangement. The study of bigram, letter pairs, a frequency by editor Amos Densmore, a brother of the financial backer James Densmore, is believed to have influenced the array of letters. The placement of the letters changed a few more times until it became that confusing arrangement we have today. Once you get used to having the letters in alphabetical order is quite confusing. Anyone from the 15th century would have had a hard time typing. A lot of folks today have a hard time typing as well. When you first use the keyboard, you spend all day just trying to figure out where the right letters are. A couple of months went by with nothing new on the computer. Then again, Ken always turned it off when not in use. One night they were going out and Ken did leave the computer on. When they returned, there was a new file on the disk. It was titled Reate. R-E-A-T-E. Odd name unless you know how to create a file on this type of system. To make a new file, you would click on the capital C and then give it a name. If you held down on the C and typed, the C would not be written, thus the name would be R-E-A-T-E. Ken opened the file and he found a new message. It was once more written in Old English. I'll try to read this one as well. I write. Write was spelled with a Y instead of an I. I write on behalf of the many. Many is spelled M-A-N-Y-E. What strange words thou speak, although I must confess that I hath also been ill-schooled. Sometimes methinks altercations are somewhat barful, for they break many a sleeps in mine bed. Thou art goodly man who hath fanciful woman who dwell in mine home. I hath no want to affray, for only saith mine half-whited antic has ripped a twain, mine bound hath I been wreathed a night. I hath seen many altercations, lastly charge house and thy home. 'Tis a fitting place with lights which devil maketh, and costly things that only mine friend Edmund Gray can afford, or the king himself. 'Twas a great crime to hath bribed mine house. L.W. As you can see, they really spoke strange back then, and the spelling, well, you just kind of got to figure it out for yourself. A devil was spelled D-E-V-Y-L-L. L.W. was found to have been Lucas Wainman, who had lived in a house back in the 1500s that sat where the cottage had been built. Reading the message, it sounded as if Lucas is still there, only living, if that's the right word, in another dimension or plane. What do you do when you discover you have a ghost in your home? Run, get an exorcist? Move? Freak out? Or you could try communicating with him. This is where things get tricky. You have only the words coming through whichever form of communication you use to decide if you're talking to a real ghost or something else. The movie The Exorcist was based on a real event. The main character was actually a young boy who was using a Ouija board to talk to his aunt who had recently died. There was nothing to indicate he had actually gotten a hold of something else, something that led to him becoming possessed. Some folks will tell you there are certain things you can do to ensure you don't wind up with unwanted guests. They know this because, well, they know this. I've heard from the Ouija board proponents, they see their talking boards to be the same as others who use the Ovilus or the EMF detector. To them, it's all the same. You're communicating with the dead. Well, I see it as being somewhat different. There are things you must do to use the talking board, things that could be construed as being a ritual of sorts. It takes two people to use a Ouija board. One person is not able to work the board correctly. You have to get a friend to use it with you. Having a male and a female is usually recommended. Timing is also important. They say that the board works best at night. There's less interference in the atmosphere. You can use it any time, but you get the best results at night. You're supposed to create an atmosphere. The Ouija is more fun if you darken the room and you light some candles. Turn off the TV and any sounds that might be coming, like cell phones. You're supposed to sit facing each other, and you place the board on your knees, touching if possible. You're not really supposed to use a table. Decide on who is going to ask the questions. Both people can ask questions, but only one is supposed to be in control. You placed your fingers on the planchette. You and your partner should place the fingers of both hands very lightly. Purposely move the planchette around in a circle on the board for a moment or two. This is to get things warmed up. My cats are going nuts. Don't let the board control the session. The medium should begin by announcing that the session will only allow an experience that is positive or towards a higher good and that negative energies are not welcomed. Begin simply. Start with simple questions, ones that require a yes and no answer. Be patient. You must not begin to get answers right away. Give the board a chance to warm up. Be polite. When the board starts working, thank the board or entity for showing up and communicating with you. Don't ask stupid questions. Things like, when am I going to die? If the board says you're going to die in 6 months, you're going to spend the next 6 months needlessly worrying about what is going to happen, or you're going to discover in 6 months that the board was right. Certain questions you don't want to ask. Don't ask for physical signs. Many experienced users warn against asking for physical signs from the spirit, such as, would you make a noise in the room, or would you tap on the table? You're not supposed to believe everything the board tells you. Sometimes they will mislead you. So if you're talking to a real honest-to-God ghost, why would they lie? Well, that's just a question I often ask. Once you're done, and this is the most important suggestion, you're supposed to close the board. You tell the board that you're done for the evening, and then you slide the planchette over to where it says goodbye, and then remove your hands. The last one is the most important. If you listen to the Halloween show from back in October, you will have heard about the Velici's case in Spain, where Estefania Gutierrez Lazaro was playing with a Ouija board when it was destroyed before being closed. By using a Ouija board, you're opening a portal to another dimension. Which dimension? Good luck figuring that one out. What's behind door number 2? You're only going to find out if you open it. That line about saying a session will only allow an experience that is positive or towards a higher good and that negative energies are not welcome, well, that's right up there with being surprised when some maniac enters a gun-free zone and starts shooting people. But we had a sign that said they couldn't do that. I told that demon he wasn't allowed in our house. The long and short of it is, when you're using a talking board, you are summoning someone or something to come visit you. When we use an EMF or a spirit box, we are asking any ghosts that are already there if they want to talk. We're not summoning some unknown entity to travel from who knows where to enter our homes to visit. When you start poking around in the unknown, you have no idea what the outcome might be. That sounds like a fancy quote. Well, I just made it up. You can quote me if you want. Ken read the message and he decided he was going to reply by typing out something on the computer and then leave it there. Later that day, he received a reply. He believed it was from L.W. It was in the same language, the same writing, though with some anachronistic words and expressions, saying that he was writing from the year 1521. L.W. said the king was Henry VIII, who was 48 years old at the time. According to historians, King Henry would have been 30 in 1521. Now ask yourself, how old is the Queen of England without looking it up? I'll bet King Henry VIII told folks he was a bit younger than he was, or those around him may have told people he was younger. L.W. wanted to know what they were doing with his house. This could be considered a friendly inquiry. You're now living in the house that sits on the land where he had built and lived in his home hundreds of years ago. What are your plans for it? Ken was in the process of remodeling. Maybe the new construction upset the spirits, or maybe he was just curious. Ken and Debbie kept up corresponding with this person, spirit, ghost, sharing their home. He had lived in the house 463 years ago. L.W. was able to see what Ken was doing to the house as he moved things around and built others. L.W. was also aware of what was going on in the village around them. He knew about the school and how the town had grown. Over time, Ken and Debbie built up quite a relationship with their guest from the past. Ken was well aware that the messages from L.W. only appeared when he was out of the house. This got him to thinking maybe somebody was sneaking in while he was away. He began placing things by the windows and doors that only he knew about, so if an intruder slipped in, something would be moved and Ken would catch on. Eventually, Ken began to believe that nobody, well, no one living, was entering their home. It had to be Lucas Weinman from hundreds of years ago. But how? Ken contacted some researchers from the local UFO group, as well as people from the Society for Psychical Research. I've seen where folks asked why he didn't just put in security cameras to keep an eye on the computer. The first camcorder was invented just a few years before this bizarre story began. They were big, expensive, and there were no automatic settings. You could turn the camera on and let it run until the tape, maybe an hour or two, ran out, and that was that. To add to the confusion, L.W. began asking questions that began to give the impression he thought they might be hoaxing him. About this time, Debbie started having vivid dreams where she traveled back in time and met with Lucas. Now, this was easy enough to explain since she was thinking about the 1500s a lot and her attention was on Lucas. On the computer, Lucas began mentioning some of the things he was supposed to have told Debbie while she was dreaming. As the dreams and computer text began to coincide, Debbie began to think she was somehow manifesting the messages through some form of psychokinesis type ability that she didn't even know she had. As if this story wasn't wild enough, Lucas asked if Ken was acquainted with a person named One. Lucas told Ken he had been in contact with a being named One who was from 2109. This person was communicating by using a Lems Boiste, or box of lights. One had told Lucas he was a time traveler. Great, a new kink in an already crazy experience. Ken thought about this new revelation and decided to keep going. He typed out calling 2109 on the computer, and then he just left the message on the screen. Someone answered. This person, spirit, or entity never claimed to be from 2109. He or she only answered using that designation. 2109 was probably a group of people. A message was found on the computer that said, Ken, Deb, Peter. Peter was another person that they had brought to their home to try and figure out what was going on with those messages. The message went on. We are sorry that we can give you only two choices. One, that you either have your predicament explained in such a non-rhyme way that you may have instant understanding but cause what should not be to happen. Or two, try to understand that you three have a purpose that shall in your lifetime change the face of history. We, 2109, must not affect your thoughts directly, but give you some sort of guidance that will allow room for your own destiny. All we can say is that we are all part of the same God, whatever He, it is. Now the computer was being used over a time span of 580 years, or someone was making it seem that way. No, it was not someone hacking in by using the internet. The computer didn't even have a modem hooked to it. The modem was invented in 1977. You had a phone cradle that the handset was placed on, and the computer would communicate by using sounds sent over the phone system. One, or 2109, seemed to be messing with some of the messages coming from Lucas. Either 2109 didn't want Ken talking to Lucas, or he didn't want Ken to receive all the messages sent his way. One message from 2109 went as follows. It is better to have no knowledge at all than to have a distorted view of the truth because of your lack of understanding. We, 2109, are not without compassion, but if you continue to disrupt our experiments, then it is likely you will find your destiny. We shall, however, allow one more communication with you so that you may ask your profound questions. We shall answer as you wish. If, in terms of physics, then it shall be so. But remember that our limits are set by your own abilities and not ours. There is no one after the man you call Lucas. The chance factor will not reoccur again in a time span your kind can relate to. A kind of a threat, find your destiny. 2109 told Ken it was his communicating with Lucas that had caused the paranormal activity going on in their house. He also told Ken he was not going to allow any more messages to go between him and Lucas for the time being. After being told to stop communicating with Lucas, Debbie had a dream in which Lucas was arrested for witchcraft. Folks had heard about his communicating with spirits using unknown and evil devices. The arrest is confirmed when Ken receives a message that is supposed to come from the sheriff who has arrested Lucas. The sheriff wanted to know who and what Lucas was and how he was communicating. Ken and Debbie communicated with the sheriff, and somehow they convinced him to release Lucas. What was said is unknown. And during this time, they discovered that Lucas Weinman is not his real name. Lucas is actually a man named Thomas Harden or Thomas Howarden. They may have thought they were talking to a sheriff in the 1500s, or it could have been 2109 telling them these things as a part of their experiment. 2109 was unhappy that they had found out Lucas's real name. 2109 said, "At present you have 2 Lucases running around your house. If at any time the 2 are to meet, we cannot explain the devastation that will erupt within the time continuum. We must stop communication with Lucas, 1, but we cannot interfere with the other. You must help by giving us every word uttered by Thomas Howarden from the second you received his true name. You must also state how much information you have on this man. Everything, word for word. Avoid any other communication you may have with him. A desperation. Be quick." How to handle this new problem? They're not to communicate with Lucas or Thomas by computer. Debbie suggests that they go old school and write out messages on plain old paper. They write out several notes and leave them around the cottage. During all of this, the Society for Psychical Research is running around with cameras and recorders trying to either prove Ken is instigating some form of a hoax, or they are actually witnessing a spirit communication from some distant time. Ken asks 2109 if they can get rid of the poltergeists so he can talk with Lucas or Thomas again. They reply, "Yes, we shall hold back as best we can on the poltergeist. Sorry you find us so unfriendly. Ask the man David what he thinks of conjectural tachyons and what are his theories of casualty. What answer does he have for its paradox? Cheers, 2109. It turned out that Ken did know a man named David, who was interested in tachyons and had in fact been giving a class on them that morning. Tachyons are one of the most interesting elements arising from Einstein's theory of special relativity. In 1905, a theory is based on 2 postulates. Nothing with mass moves faster than the speed of light, and physical law remains the same in all non-inertial reference frames. A significant consequence of special relativity is the fact that space and time are united into a single entity, space-time. That means a particle's journey through speed is linked to its journey through time. The term tachyon first entered scientific literature in 1967 in a paper entitled Possibility of Faster Than Light Particles by Columbia University physicist Gerald Feinberg. Feinberg posited that tachyons, particles, would arise from a quantum field with imaginary mass, explaining why the first postulate of special relativity doesn't restrain their velocity. Tachyons might be able to travel through time as well as space. If you saw the movie The Prince of Darkness, a bunch of college kids are investigating a huge container hidden in the basement of an old church. Everybody keeps having the same dream. Brian Marsh, played by Jameson Parker, comes up with the idea that the dreams are a form of tachyon being sent to them from the future. Alice Cooper was in this movie. He played a bum. The idea of messages being sent in the form of tachyons is the possible explanation for the messages from both the 1500s as well as the year 2109. 2109 went on to say, "What you would call a tachyon universe, but your understanding is incorrect. We will give you a plotting of a star next time. We move at a speed so that we cover every point in your time and universe. We have no form. We feed off a net energy that you will not have heard of." Ken asked 2109 if they needed a screen or a computer monitor to communicate. They give an explanation compared to the echoes. They said two men are back to back on top of a mountain, surrounded by mountains, having to angle their vocal sound waves very exactly in order for the sound to reach the other person via the least number of echoes possible. So, too much of a signal won't have been absorbed. This reply apparently appears instantly on the disk, either as soon as Ken had written his message before turning the computer off, or as soon as it was turned back on. In his last message, Thomas says he's being forced to leave his home because the people of Doddleston are very wary of him. They despise him and are probably going to burn down his farm. He says he's writing a book about his experiences. "One day you will all sit down at my table for wine and meat by the river in Oxford, where we shall read each other's books and laugh, and we shall speak of truth and good men, watching Oxford change together for evermore. In your time my book will be old, but I shall not go to my God until it is written. Then we will all be truly embraced. My love to you all. I shall await you in Oxford. Thomas Harden." 2109 told Ken that Thomas did write the book. It was in Latin, and it was placed in a secure location. They say the inscription says, "Me writes this in the hope that mine fellows will one day find this book. Then may our lands be not so distant." Nobody has ever found the book that Thomas is supposed to have written and left somewhere secure, or they did. They confiscated the book and it's hidden away in some government vault somewhere. The folks doing the investigation were at a loss to explain the messages since the computer didn't have a modem and there wasn't even a port to hook one up. Ken asked 2109 about UFOs in 1986. They replied, "Time, UFOs, and most other types of paranormal are in the same way all connected. In certain geographical locations, there is what we call areas of convectual magnetism. These can be explained by the magnetic lines that run around the Earth. Imagine, if you will, circles running around the Earth clockwise. These are positive lines of magnetic force, PLMF. Also, circles running anticlockwise, which are negative, NLMF. When two opposite running lines are crossed, usually a permanent crossing rather than random, the light-time continuum is vastly distorted, so much so that a sensitive individual may witness what you may call a timescape. That is, a glimpse of a part event or that of a future event. We hear you say, but you said matter could not travel in time. This is true as if matter were to travel by physical motion. Then mass around the moving object would be so dense that the Earth and most other celestial bodies in your solar system would be consumed or imbalanced in such a way that they would decay rapidly. Imagine, again, please, a person from the future happily floating along in his silver spaceship, crossing an area of convectual magnetism. All of a sudden, his instrument panel goes shaky. He may feel slightly dizzy or nauseous. A green mist caused by atmospheric distortion forms around the vessel. He then will probably fall into a trance state of such depth that his soul is squeezed through the light-time gate and forced to project a physical mirror image of him, herself, as, and then there's a word missing, of their place-time origin and their immediate vicinity. This can occur sometimes for only several seconds and does only register for that individual subconscious, but onlookers from the time which is broken into will witness the very physical sight and action of this alien from another time, then, totally by confusion, elaborate on the facts. That is way too mixed up of a conversation. Ken and Debbie began to lose interest in communicating with 2109. As for Thomas, he was no longer sending anything on their computer. They said Thomas did leave some answers on their paper that they had placed around the cottage, but the answers were not made public. Try as I did, I was never able to find any of them. As time went by, the investigation kind of fell flat. They couldn't prove Ken or Debbie were hoaxing them, and they couldn't prove or disprove the messages they were coming from the past or the future. They had to leave with far more questions than answers. Could the Doddleston message have been just one big hoax? Perhaps. Even back in 1985, people were doing nasty things just to get attention. Then again, there are things out there that we cannot explain or understand. Maybe the whole thing was not coming from 1500, but from the future. 2109 might have been some entity in the future performing an experiment to see how by convincing someone they were communicating with the 1500s, things might have changed in the future. Or the folks calling themselves 2109 might have been trying to see how the people living in 1985 would react to being messaged by people from the distant past. How could a man living in 1521 use a computer? This wasn't a laptop with a battery. The first laptop computer was invented in 1981, but it was heavy and it had a limited battery life. The BBC computers were all desktops. Thomas or Lucas would not have been able to use a computer in 1521. There's no electricity. Believe it or not, some ghosts don't know they're dead. Their spirit goes on long after their body's in the grave, acting as if nothing has changed. Thomas did allude to knowing he was communicating with people beyond his lifetime, or he figured it out once seeing all the weird contraptions showing up in his house. He did say he was familiar with how the town had changed. The whole idea of his still being alive in 1521 and using a computer just doesn't add up. Now, the idea that he was a ghost that discovered the computer was a means of communication with those around him is a lot easier to handle. Well, at least for me. How do I explain 2109? Do you know about the idea of one ghost or spirit dominating other spirits or ghosts? John Edwards from Paranormal Sideshow refers to these as being a keeper, a kind of like a boss of the other ghosts. In their book, Till Death and Beyond, John and Stacy Edwards tell about investigating a place called Beehive Antiques in Elizabethton, Tennessee. And during the investigation, they would be getting great EVPs, and all of a sudden, the spirit would go away, followed by a dark presence entering the room. John began calling this the Keeper, a spirit that controls other spirits. He talks about it on page 57 of their book, if you've got a copy laying around. Maybe the person or people calling themselves 2109 were actually one of these keepers that didn't want Ken to communicate with Thomas. Some of what was said might have been just babble to confuse Ken and convince him the other thing was from the future. Ghost hunting or investigating is not an exact science. Some scientists say it's not science at all. They spend too much time in labs sniffing weird concoctions boiling over Bunsen burners. Ah, the boys in the white lab coats. And no one was ever to determine if Ken and Debbie were writing the messages. The computer didn't have the ability to show when or who wrote things on it. I would not be surprised to find out that Thomas really did write those messages. Perhaps he was just some ghost caught in their cottage who wanted to communicate with them. If you enjoyed tonight's show, tell everybody they need to listen in as well. I do get a few nasty grams from folks who don't like the show. What I can't understand is if they don't like the show, why are they listening? It's truly bizarre. I can understand folks pointing out some of the mistakes I've made over the years, but the trolls, well, they're very annoying. If you like the show and you'd like to pass on an idea for any show in the future, or if you've got something you'd like to see in my next book, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. You can also find all of my past shows on iHeartRadio or on YouTube. But if you're looking on YouTube, you've got to type in the whole name, Strange Things with Chris James. Last time I looked, there were about 35 podcasts, all with strange things in their name. And once again, if you'd like to buy some of my merchandise, you can find shirts, coffee cups, bags, computer covers, all kinds of neat things at tpublic.com. And don't wait till the last minute to do your Christmas shopping. Get out there today and buy something for the people you need to buy for. But remember what Dave Ramsey says. Stop spending money you don't have. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, they say murdered 3? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?